Hi, I'm George. Welcome to G Makes, and today we are going to learn the basics of how to make this fun little UFO animation. So here's kind of what the final product will look like, and let's get right to it. So I'm going to make a new general project, and I'm going to delete this light because I don't need it, but I'm going to keep this camera. I'll hide it for now. And I'm also going to need this cube in a little bit. So the only thing I'm going to do with it now is make sure my screencast keys are on, so you can see what I'm doing. There we go, right down here in the corner. And now I'm just going to move this up so it's level right there. Perfect. And now I'm going to hide it as well. And now we are going to make that wonderful little UFO, that flying spaceship. So we are going to start with a cylinder. We're going to move that up, scale it till, let's say, there, along the Z-axis as well. Let's get it kind of there. Now we're going to go into edit mode, Control R, couple loop cuts, and SZ, because I want these to be small, because I'm going to grab this top one and this bottom one and scale those in, like so. I'm going to grab this top one only and scale that in just a little bit more, maybe this bottom one a little bit too, and then I'm also going to put another loop cut right here and scale that as well. There we go. Now that's the basis of our spaceship, the base kind of shape. Now on this bottom, I'm going to grab this. I'm going to insert a face and then insert another one. GZ, raise that up a bit. Perfect. And now I'm going to grab these two edges. First, I'm going to Control A to scale because I'm going to bevel those edges and I don't want anything weird to happen. So Control B to bevel. And I'm going to hit C so they clamp. I'll just give 2 levels of bevel. There we go. So it's just a little bit smoother. And I'm also going to do the same thing with this. Control B. Perfect. And I have clamp still on so nothing happens. Maybe this one I'll go 3. Just a little bit of bevel. Perfect. And then up here, I'm maybe going to squash this just a tiny bit. I'm just going to extrude it up along the Z-axis. About that much, and I'll also put it in a bit. And that's because this is where like the dome's going to sit. I'm not insetting it because my dome is now actually going to be a sphere, so I want it to like fully mesh in, as you'll see. But that is the basis of our spaceship, our UFO body. And look, it's pretty darn good. You could shade smooth this if you want, but I want some of those hard edges, so if I am going to do that, I'm going to go to my normals over here and hit auto smooth, so that way I still get those sharp edges where I want them. But I actually don't want to shade smooth. I like the shade flat for this. And now it's nice, but it's a little plain. Like when this is spinning, you're not really going to be able to tell since everything's kind of the same, especially if you shade smooth. So I want to add a little more variety, a little more detail to this. So the first things first is I'm going to just add a simple modifier. Right over here, we are going to add a wireframe, but we want to actually keep our base, even though this looks pretty cool. So we're going to uncheck Replace Original, so that we have these little panels, because it looks like the panels on a UFO, and when it spins, it's going to make a nice, make it look real nice. Now you could also like put a vertex group if you don't want every single every single side panel that came with the cylinder, or when you import your cylinder, you could make it have less, basically sides. Whatever, but I like this, and it's going to look really good when it spins, but I want even a little bit more detail, a little more of a way to tell that it's actually spinning really fast. And also like a classic UFO thing, I think, is like a ring of lights around, whether they help it fly or just are cool lights or whatever. So we're going to do that, but as we're about to do in just a little bit for kind of the viewport or the like cockpit, I guess, up here, I don't want to use a UV sphere. You could, but my whole idea for this kind of animation is that maybe you make a couple, or if you've seen on my channel, I have the one where it's a couple, the same thing over and over, but with a different primitive, because this UFO's searching for that special little blender primitive that's going to take back home to its home planet, and its home planet is the icosphere planet. So because this is, for me, an icosphere spaceship. And also I like that look of an icosphere because it's kind of like low poly, which I think works real well with this kind of style I'm doing. I'm going to insert an icosphere as my little light. I'm going to keep it at 2 subdivisions for this. and I'll scale it, and I'll kind of get it roughly where I want it to be. And maybe that's still a little big. Apply that scale again. And now I'm going to add a couple modifiers to this icosphere. So first things first, I'm going to add an array. And then I'm going to add a curve modifier, because we use a curve to make it go around, so we don't have to like hand put it every time. We have a little more control. So first thing to do with that is we need a curve. So I'm just going to take that, I'm going to move it up. I'm not going to really touch it besides that. Go back to my icosphere, click the little eyedropper, click that Bezier curve, and there we go. So now, if you scale this, you can scale it out to roughly where you want them. And then you can go ahead and add a couple spheres. I want this a little more spaced out. So let's go -Z so I can kind of get a look at this. Let's say, let's go to 10. You can try to line them up kind of with panels, but they don't have to be exact. I'm going to actually go down to 8, and we'll bump that up a bit. Yeah, there we go. Okay, perfect. So I like that. I like kind of that placement right on the edge. They're going to be spinning around. So now I can take this Bezier circle, and I want to, or curve circle, I guess. And I'm just going to parent everything, so this and these icospheres, to this UFO body. So with them both selected, Control P, Object, Keep Transform. I'm also going to rename this to my UFO. And there we are. So this UFO has the Bezier circle and the icosphere all down it. So if we move this, everything moves with it, and nothing gets stretched or weird or anything. Because you can see if we move this circle just by itself, the circles move with it. We want everything to move together. So I'm also going to hide that from the render and from our viewport. So we just have this. And this is our spaceship, almost. One last thing I want to do for detailing is add, like I mentioned, that little like curved dome that you always see a UFO have on top. That UFO has on top, classically a flying saucer. And I'm going to use another icosphere. Again, you could use a UV sphere if you want something a little more like realistic or whatever, but my whole idea again is this is an icosphere spaceship. So I'm going to go ahead. There we go. And now that is not parented at all, so I want to again select that icosphere, select my UFO, Control P, Object, Keep Transform. And now if I move my spaceship, everything moves it. And that's a spaceship, look at that. Let's move that whole thing just a little bit up. And with that, let's say right there, we're going to bring back our cube. I'll maybe move that just a little bit higher as well. Yeah, let's say right there. I like that. Maybe a little higher. Perfect. And so this is our cube. And this is going to be the primitive, the object that gets sucked up or scanned maybe. Maybe it doesn't actually want this cube, but that it gets scanned by this UFO. So how do we do that? Well, first thing is, as before, as I did at the beginning, I made this level with this ground plane, quote unquote. And now I'm going to basically duplicate it. So Shift D, and on that duplicate cube, so cube 0.001, I'm going to add a modifier, and that's going to be a wireframe modifier. And now you can see it like sticks out on the outside of the cube, and I don't want that. So I want the offset to be -1, and there we go. No more sticking out. It's all inside. And if I hide that normal cube, we have our wireframe cube. So I'm maybe going to bump that up thickness just a little bit, maybe like 0.03 instead, just to get a little more of a body. And I'll bring back my normal cube. And then with that wireframe cube selected, I'm going to select the other cube as well. Control P, Object, Keep Transform. And that's so that when we move this regular cube, the wireframe scanned version also moves with it. And there we go. That's the basis of how to make that, like, how the scan will look. But now we actually got to make that effect happen. So how do we do that? Well, we need something that will scan this cube. So we're going to insert another mesh, another cylinder, and we're going to move that like there, and we're going to scale it, and this is going to be that beam. So I'm going to go back, and I'll move this down so it roughly hits the ground. You could also move it before you scale it, but, you know, I got impatient. And now in vertex mode, or in edit mode, I'm going to select this top level, this top ring, and just scale that down. So it's something pretty small, because I really want this cube to be able to like stick out and be scanned, even though this spaceship has a pretty big, like, I guess, docking bay or whatever underneath it. But there we go. So that is, now if we go out of edit mode and turn off our X-ray, that is our beam. But nothing's really happening with it. So first thing, I'm going to shade that smooth. There we go. And I'm going to, again, do that whole thing with normal, so that way this bottom bit's flat. And now we're going to do a fun little effect, which is on this cube, we want to add a Boolean. So that way it will get rid of this base cube wherever this beam, let me rename this to beam, wherever this beam touches. So on this cube, we want the Boolean object to be the beam. Now, if I move this cube around, you can't really see it, but if we go, maybe you can see it in X-ray. Yeah, you can see it in X-ray down at the bottom there, and in the corners. The main cube starts disappearing, and the wireframe remains. So now, how do we actually show that? Well, it's all in texturing. And before we do that, I think I want to also grab these faces of my beam and just scale that up so it's a little bit better. Yeah, so I want it to fully cover my cube, just so we get that full effect. All right, so now the cube is covered, but let's get to texturing so we can actually see some of this effect in action. So I'll start with the beam right here. I'm going to go to my shader editor. I'll make a new one. I'll call this beam. And we are going to do a couple things right here. So first things first, just for this one, we are going to use a transparent BSDF. I'm going to turn off my caps lock real quick. A transparent BSDF, and nothing is going to show because we are in Eevee. I'm going to render this in Eevee because it doesn't really need to be in cycles. But if you are in Eevee, you have to change your blend mode to alpha clip or alpha hashed. Either one should work for this. I'm going to stick with alpha clip, and there we go. You can see that now that Boolean is working. We have our just wireframed cube. I'm also going to change the color of this just a tiny bit, maybe something towards a blue. We're not really going to see it, but you know, it's nice to have in there. Now, the other thing I want to do for this beam, though, is I want to go back into edit mode, and with this bottom face selected, I'm going to add a new slot and assign it. And we'll name this something like a new material and name it like beam bottom. The bottom. And that new material now, so we can go out of edit mode, that new material we will give an emission texture to. Because I want this to be like, it's glowing, like there's light on the bottom. So we'll make that a little bit of a kind of bluish white. And we'll give it an emission strength of just like 20. So it kind of glows white. And then in our render settings, we're going to go to bloom. There we go. Maybe 20 is a bit strong. 10. We'll do even 5 for now. And I'm going to go to my render. And now I'm going to insert a BSDF. Or not a BSDF, a HDRI. So many letters, so many acronyms. Down here in my world settings, I'm going to go to color, click the yellow dot, go to environment texture, open HDRI, and now I'm going to choose. This is kind of my default one. I also like this Cape Hill because it's kind of like early morning, and then this outdoor one's really fun. I'm going to choose the Cape Hill. These are all from, I think it's called Ambient CG now, or C00 textures is what used to be called. So they're all just free HDRIs. Yeah, look at that. And now I'm back in my render settings, film transparent. So we just get the lighting and none of that like image data. But look at that. That's pretty darn sweet. So let's keep texturing. First thing I want to do is just on this wireframe. It's just our basic material. So I'll make a copy of that and name this wireframe. Maybe I'll name it cube wireframe, so that way my textures kind of stick together since they all start with the same thing. Because I'll go to my default cube, and I'll name that cube. But back to my wireframe, back to this cube wireframe. I'm again going to use an emission texture. So an emission, give me that, and we're going to make this neon green. deselect it. And this one will make like 10. We want this to really glow. Perfect, perfect. So now you can see if we move this, and you might get some clipping, and that's just because the camera itself, that shouldn't show up in the render. If it does, you can just you can scale that inner cube in a little bit, so it's a little bit smaller. But there we go. So that's the base of that kind of texturing. But last thing on this beam is I do want to give it a little bit of, a little bit of noise in it, and also show the shape of it a little bit more. So to do that, I'm going to, with my beam, I'm going to slot 1. And this isn't really a texturing thing, but it is a particle system thing. I'm going to add a little particle system right on my beam. And I do want to use an emitter, but I want it to be only in the volume. So I want it to source, I want it to be volume, and because I want to come from the volume and not really go anywhere, I don't really want it to leave, I want the lifetime to be very short, like 1 or 2. So now if we play this, you can see they kind of pop up. Maybe 2's even long. I really want these just to kind of like pop like they're little bubbles. Yeah, there we go. I again am going to use icospheres as an instance object. You don't really have to. You could keep just the base there, but I want to control the size a little bit better and everything, and I like the idea of icospheres. So I'm going to move this along the x-axis. I'm going to go back to my y. I'll scale it down a little bit just because. And there we go. So that's going to be my instance object for this cone. So I'm going to go to, I'm in my particle system, and we are going to go to render, and we're going to render this as an object, and instance object to this icosphere. I'll even apply my scale on that just so we can use the object scale a little bit. Show emitter, we want that. None of that really matters. Show emitter, perfect. So now if we hit in, maybe that is a little small on that scale, so maybe I'll take off object scale. I don't need object scale, but I want this scale to be, let's put that to 1. It was a little too big. Let's go down. I like right there. Scale randomness. We're going to give a little bit of scale randomness, sure. There we go. So now we have these little things that pop up. We want them to last the whole duration of our animation, so we'll end at 250. And there we go. We get these little things, these little beams inside that show up. And I like this transparent BSDF, but it's not quite doing it for me. So I'm going to go back to my normal BSDF. I'm going to give that a color of like blue. We'll give it maybe a little lighter blue. And then my alpha, I'm just going to bring pretty far down. Clip's not the best one for this. I kind of want to go to hashed. All the way down. Alpha hashed. Hashed. And we'll scale that down. We want a little bit of color in there. Alpha blend. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. So now we get a little bit more of that cone shape in there. Perfect. And that's it. So that's the scale. That's the beam right there of everything. So now let's quickly texture our UFO. Nothing too fancy for this. Oh, before I forget, because I will forget, I do want these particles to have a texture. That's not just the default one. So for the material for this, I'm going to make this icosphere have that material. I'll just do a new, and I'll name this like bubbles. And I'm just going to make something that's not rough, and I'll make it like, again, like a bluish kind of color, and maybe a little bit down on that alpha. Again, I'm going to have to go over here and go to alpha blend. We'll go alpha hashed. There we go. So now we get kind of like bubbly things popping up. Maybe that's a little too bright for me, but something like that. There we go. We get little bubbles popping up in this beam, little scanning bubbles. So that's the basis for the beam again, and now we're going to go to our UFO. So I'm going to add a new texture called UFO. UFO. There we go. And I'm just going to make this metallic, so all the way to 1, so it's metallic. I'll give this a classic, I don't know, like a red. There we go. Oh, yes, look at that in the sun. And I'll make this fairly shiny, but not too shiny. So we'll go like there. Perfect. And now up here, this icosphere, we'll add a new one, and we'll name this like UFO dome. Again, so my textures kind of all stick together, so I can find them kind of easily if I need to. A roughness, we won't make it super shiny, but we'll make it fairly. And then base color, we're going to make this pretty much dark black. I'll maybe put it slightly towards navy, or like purplish. There we go. And we'll make it, it's supposed to be kind of glass, so maybe a little shinier. And there we go. So that's our dome. And now last thing on the UFO are these lights. So I'll name it UFO lights. And we'll make, we'll use my favorite thing, which is an emission texture, especially in Eevee. God, love an emission texture in Eevee. So we're going to make this something like yellowish, maybe a little gold, but not super. There we go. I'll make this pretty bright, brightest thing. There we go, 20. And that's our UFO. Look at it. That's pretty darn neat. I can even hide this right now. You can hide that from the render too. Yeah, and we can play back. That's the only thing we really have animated so far. We didn't really even animate it. But now let's animate it. And these, just real quick, I'm not going to get anything super fancy. I'm not going to really mess with the curves, but I'm just going to show you the basics of how to kind of animate this. The UFO flying in, and then scanning and flying out. The cube maybe floating up a little bit. So let's start that. First things first, I'm going to bring back our camera just so we have an idea of where to go. I'm going to also change this aspect ratio. My original one was a kind of made it for Instagram more or less, so it was a square. I also like that kind of look for it, so I'm going to keep this a square. So I'm going to go 1920 by 1920, and I'll zoom out, and then I'm going to hit N, and I'm going to go to view, and then lock camera to view, and I'm going to, yes, make this slightly at an angle, just so it's something a little bit interesting. But I want everything more or less, I don't want it that close. Let's say there. Perfect. Unlock that camera. And now I'm going to open just a new tab. And I'm also going to, for this camera, so camera selected, going to go to its settings, and then I'm going to viewport display and passport out, or I guess passport out. Passport? I don't know. Whatever you say that word, whether it's French or not, I want that just so I can more clearly see what my actual render is going to look like. I'm just going to keep in material view mode, and I'm going to get out of that camera. So now, first thing, I'm going to make sure I have the right number of frames I want, or the right frame rate. So I want to be in 30 FPS, and I'm going to go somewhere in the middle. Let's say like frame 100 if I'm going to do 250. Frame 100, and just where this this spaceship is, I'm going to hit give a frame for location, and also for this beam, I'm going to give a keyframe for scale. And now a couple of things I did before actually I'm going to undo that scale keyframe, because a couple of things I want to do before I fully start animating this. Beam selected, UFO body selected, Control P, object keep transform. Actually before that, because I actually want to move this origin of this. So Control and then period will let you modify the origin, and I actually want to make this up here. So now I'm going to select this. I'm going to Control period to get out of the origin control. Now the UFO, Control P, object keep transform. The reason I did that is because if you change the origin after you've parented something, things can get funky sometimes. So now I'm going to I scale, and this should have perfect that location keyframe. Nothing will change at the moment, but if I want to go back a couple frames, let's go to 90. Now I want to scale this up, so I want to make this real small, so it kind of hides in there, and so you can't see it. And now I want to I scale. So now if we play this back, we get it shooting out. Maybe I'll keep it to like, let's say 160, so I scale, and then I'll have it, we had 10 frames before, maybe I'll have it really quickly shoot up, because maybe it's like, no, I don't want this cube. So I'll go 5 frames, I scale, scale, and there we go, and I scale. Perfect. So now, right now we have, it comes out, it scans, whatever, and then it shoots back up. Perfect. So now we're going to animate the actual UFO. flying in. So again, we have that base where it flies in, and since it comes in, actually starts scanning at around 90, we really want it to fly in maybe at like 85. So I'm just going to move that base keyframe all the way over there. And since our thing comes out and then really goes back in, the beam does at like 165, at like 168 maybe, I'll set, not scale, I'll set another location keyframe for this UFO. So now I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning, and I'm going to add a keyframe, that's the word, for rotation. I'm going to do this first, and then I'm going to go all the way to the end and add another one for rotation. But first, I'm going to rotate it along the z-axis. I want it to spin that way just a ton, like a ton. Blah, blah, blah. Let's say there, 3,600 degrees. I'll hit I on that to get that rotation. And now, if we play it back, it's going to kind of slowly get up, speed up, slow down. I don't want that, so I'm going to select both of those rotation keyframes. Just right-click in the timeline and interpolation mode to linear. And now we get a spinning UFO. Look at that. It's actually spinning, and it scans out, and then it will scan back in, and then theoretically it will fly off. But you can see how those little bits of detail kind of catch the light, especially around this edge and even just on the top here. Yes, and just give it some real nice detailing. One thing I forgot to do real quick while I have the shader editor open is I'm going to select these faces right here and this top one, and I'm going to assign that to a new slot. Make a new like UFO collar, and we are going to make that metallic again and just give it like a silver color. So just darken. There we go, and make it a little bit shiny as well. Maybe not quite as shiny as the body. There we go. So that way we have a little differentiation, whatever, a little difference between where the body is, how this connects, and the little cockpit area, I guess is what I'm calling it, the dome. But so we have something that's spinning, it scans, but then nothing, it doesn't fly out or anything. We want it to fly out. So, oh, and you can also see like it scans and then the wireframe happens. So let's get this quickly animated to fly in and fly out. So again, this is our base, so we want to start somewhere decently off frame. Again, I'm going to kind of go into my camera just so I can see. And let's get this to go. I'm actually going to put it somewhere like here. GZ. And now I, location, perfect. There we go. We got a little animation. It comes in, maybe clips as the camera. That's kind of cool. And now we want it to fly out again. So again, like we want to kind of speed out. So like there, somewhere like 171. I'm going to have it go just bop, bop. So GZ, we'll have it come like over here. And again, we want it to fly out. I, location, perfect. So now we get something if we look over at animation, flies in, scans, and then beelines it out. It's maybe a little quick, so we'll maybe lengthen that. Beelines out, perfect. Scans, beelines out. Maybe make that stay a little bit longer. Now I'm getting real finicky with my animation. All right, we'll just say that's good. Perfect. All right, so now the last thing I want to animate is this cube floating up. So again, the beam comes down about there. We actually want the cube itself. So we want to make sure that cube is selected. And then we can go I, location. We can even, on that cube selecting so we can see things a little bit better, we can take off that Boolean. And now I'm going to have it kind of start floating up. So let's say there, GZ. Let's have it float up to like almost at the top, like it's maybe gonna go in. And then we'll go I, location. So now it comes in and it floats up. That's maybe a little bit fast and maybe a little bit high. GZ, we'll have it float to like there. I, location. Perfect, so it floats up. And well, maybe we'll kind of floating up even slower. Now I'm getting real in the weeds with this. But it floats up, perfect. So now we want that to also maybe rotate. So I'm gonna go on this base one. And also I, rotation. And I'm just gonna kind of give it a random rotation. Kind of even past that. So I'm just gonna kind of R it, Yeah, let's do that. I rotation. So now it floats up and it kind of gets rotated. Perfect. And then when it goes back, when that comes off, maybe right there, we want it to G. We want that I location because now we want it to pretty quickly fall GZ. And this is where I'm going to get a little bit GZ. We want it to maybe go like there. And I'm not going to do too many details on this. I location. And then we also want that to maybe, as it hits there, we want another rotation. But we'll say that's good for now. Just kind of want to move on. That's a basic principle. You could just rotate the animation like it would hit and then hit, and you can just keep hitting it. You can really get finicky with how it kind of hits. Cube is kind of, again, hard to animate if you're just going to keep the origin right there, but you don't have to do anything too specific, and like people will gloss over a lot of stuff, especially at kind of a weird angle over here. But last thing I want to do is I want to go to my good old graph editor. Now with the cube selected, object transformations, I want the Z location to add just a tiny bit of noise to it. And we are going to make sure that Z location selected. Modifiers, add modifier, noise. But I only really want it to start at like 130, restrict frame range. And I only really want it to end at like 163. You can see that's a lot, so I want that scale to be pretty smooth. But even that's a lot. I just want a little bit of variation. And that strength can even be pretty low. And we can even blend the in's pretty good, but we can blend the out a bit better. Yeah, we'll call that good for now. I'm not going to spend too much time finicking, messing with the animation to get it perfect. I just want to show you the gist of how you could animate something like that. And we'll bring back that modifier so that way we can see right here in a little animation viewport. It flies in, it scans. There we go, it's scanning and it drops. That's the gist of it. You can mess a lot with these curves for like exactly, instead of a Bezier, you can make it a little more fancy. You can get the timing down. Again, that kind of bobble and hit you can really mess with, especially depending on what your rotation ends up looking like. If you have a cylinder or a sphere, you can get it to rotate or turn when it hits the ground. And then for rendering this out, like I said, I have it on Eevee. If you want to keep, like I did in my original one, this kind of Blender background, I just got a screenshot and comp that in as the background. I did that in Premiere. You can also use that in Blender as a plane in the background. Either way, and any way you want to do it. That's been the basics of how to make this fun little flying animation. The animation you can really get into the weeds of, but the actual modeling and making of the UFO and the little cube effect itself is pretty darn simple. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this little tutorial. I hope you make something real cool, a fun animation. Take this idea, make a whole bunch of UFOs, make a whole bunch of shapes, make it scan a person, make it scan objects in the real world. Any which way you want to do with it, anything you want to make with it. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you learned something, as I've said, and take care. I'll see you next time.